Why is it that we are unable to prevent our roads from becoming flooded with motor vehicles? Why is it that we are unable to predict how much widening of roads or adding of roads will solve the problem once and for all? Why do we think the problem of congestion and pollution will be solved by someone else making a different choice, but that someone else does not include us? In the end, why is it that each of us driving vehicles cause the congestion and solution problem, but we want the government to be doing something about it? These are examples of something called collective action problem or the tragedy of the commons. Not only will I try and explain the characteristics of this, but we will try and understand the possible solutions in this episode. Hi, I'm Sathya Sankaran, and you are tuned into the OoruLabs podcast. I will try and break this down for you in today's episode of the Explainer series. Let's jump on in. Garrett Hardin in 1968 coined the term tragedy of the commons. This term refers to a situation in which individuals with access to a public resource, also called a common, act in their own interest and in doing so ultimately deplete the resource. In episode 4 of the series, we classified the objects that we consume in our life into many types of goods. We understood that air is a public good and the roads in a city provisioned for by our tax money are common goods. When each one of us buys a motor vehicle, we only look at the benefit it provides us. We realize it can take us to different places, it is convenient, it is door-to-door service, it beats other modes of transport in comfort and convenience, etc. We may think maximum about the cost of the motor vehicle, only to the extent of comparing it to another motor vehicle. And if you're rich and can afford in a big enough vehicle like an SUV, it's more likely the features you want. Cost is probably the least of your concern. And this is how we make our decisions. So it's extremely unlikely that at a point of making a purchase, you will consider the impact of your purchase on a public good like air or the congestion on the common good property like roads. Hence, when many of us make these seemingly rational self-serving transactions, we end up causing bad air quality in the city and also congesting the road for everybody else, including ourselves. This does not include other things like accidents, deaths, etc. That is a whole new story of things that we do to ourselves, and that is not even costed into this. This is an urban example of tragedy of the commons or a collective action problem that most of us can relate to. And I continually use these words in many of these episodes, so it is useful for you to understand these terms. There are personal biases and personal preferences, and there is what we commonly cause as a problem to everybody else other than ourselves, and that's what we are trying to define today. This congestion and pollution is external to your self-interested individual choice and is causing a problem to others, external to you. Hence, in technical terms, it is also called a negative externality. In other words, it imposes a economic social cost on the collective. Right? There's something called a social cost and a negative externality. I'll talk more about both of these things, negative externality and social cost, in a future episode, but it bears remembering that you can cause problem to others and that it needs to be factored in. Mansur Olson was an economist and a political scientist who wrote a book in 1965 called The Logic of Collective Action. Until his writing, people believed that if everyone in a group of any size has interests in the commons that they share with each other, like a city, for example, the people inside it, that is the citizens, then they will collectively act to achieve them. So if all of us in a city believe that we shouldn't congest our roads and cause air pollution by our transport choices, we will collectively be able to achieve this. Partially true. We all collectively shout at the government continuously to provision extra road space and ask them to clean up the air, while we continue to do what we do. But jokes apart, Olson wrote, the rational pursuit of self-interest does not guarantee rational group behavior, particularly in the context of large groups. Even if individuals within a group collectively benefit from achieving a common objective, they may not voluntarily act to pursue it. unless coercion or separate incentives are present. Meaning, the free rider problem I explained in episode 4 with respect to public goods will become more and more prominent as groups begin to get larger, preventing us from actually solving the problem for all of us. So while some of us will stop taking out the motor vehicle, switch to cycling, public transport, etc., many will sit on their sidelines and continue to free ride on the few who are doing the right thing instead of participating. So this is the free riding concept. Unless there is coercion or force or a rule of some kind from a competent authority of some kind, or an incentive or a disincentive that will prevent a lot of us from free riding, which is the equivalent of commenting on Twitter on what the government and others should do, but themselves not doing anything. What is important to note is that as the size of the collective gets larger, free riding only increases. So if a neighborhood decides to do something, it is harder to free ride because of a lot of trust and people know each other and things like that. But while the same strategy is adopted at a city level, more people will free ride. So what now? What is the way out? There are three ways to begin solving for the tragedy of commons. These are pathways. We will understand them today with the urban traffic congestion and pollution example and probably go into detail on each one of them in a separate episode later. There are a lot of episodes on this which we will try to brainstorm and understand how we solve all these problems. 1. Collectivization. Elinor Ostrom was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Economics for her work called Governing the Commons. Ostrom studied interaction of people and ecosystems for many years and showed that the use of exhaustible resource by groups of people, that is communities, cooperatives, trusts, trade unions, etc., can be rational and prevent the depletion of the resource without either state intervention or markets with private property. He showed that it is possible. What that means is collectivization in groups with common interest can work in keeping the free riders out. Right? While self-organization collectives have worked for physical assets in the rural areas where her work has been, neighborhood organizations in cities, like for example in Bengaluru or some other large city, are mostly about representing the needs of the area and the people of the area, rather than becoming some kind of full-fledged governance system. So the neighborhood RWAs, resident welfare associations in urban areas, are inclusive and they talk about what they need. They haven't been able to penalize, ostracize free riders and things like that. So there are still continuing to exist free riders and nobody knows what to do with them. In fact, the political system will actively work probably to prevent such parallel structures that competes with it. But there are groups of interest, whether in the civic area or otherwise, that act almost cultish. For example, there are cycling groups, there are birding groups who have evolved some kind of soft exclusions or ostracization of people who don't meet certain ethics of behavior. You can't go to a birding thing and then start throwing stones to get some nice pictures or something. No, it doesn't work. Photography groups have their own ethics of how to do things, how not to use lights in certain places and not convert it into a theater. So there are things like that. What this also tells us is social norms begin to evolve in such things. I'll do a separate episode on social norm because Elinor Ostrom's work in that area has been very good. Collective social norms are completely different from individual biases because what works at an individual level plays into how the group behaves and they behave differently. But that's about collectivization. Let's look at number 2, the second pathway, using the market. So the market or business that provide products and solutions to us mostly are the cause of the problems we have today. For example, we are having a congestion and pollution problem in cities because companies made cars on fossil fuel and sold more and more of it to you. And you know how you made the decision. I explained this earlier. When the outcome of a free market is different from a socially optimal outcome, it's called a market failure. I'll expand on this in a future episode, because the ways of dealing with this are totally different. But however, hence, it is counterintuitive that the market can be the one to solve it. But why not? Let's take the example of Altmo that I've been using throughout the series, the bicycling gamification platform that I built. It's paid for by corporates for whom it serves as an environmental compliance and an employee health engagement tool. It lets them be a part of a solution rather than a part of the problem, right? It is a thing that they have bought and they use it and they engage their employees with it and help them do better. And it also allows for the bicycle riders, for example, to participate in challenges, create incentives, include more people into the club that can then become bigger and solve the congestion and pollution problem. So, on one hand, you have a club of sorts, a small group which can have its own social norms that is very, and it's of known people in the same company, so they are colleagues and they ask for different things. They collectivize themselves. They ask for bike parking, they ask for showers, they ask for facilities, they may ask for incentives, but they do the right thing and they have the collectivization. They preserve the social good and the commons. And on the other hand, the corporates are able to use a tool to help themselves help these people solve the problem, right? It is also not inconceivable that a well-designed, comfortable, convenient bus service will, with reach and reliability, will be chosen by people who would much rather listen to this podcast on their commute to work rather than be stuck driving a car. This is happening with health as well. More and more health apps, after you got the smartwatches, the smartphones, and everything else, these health apps are nudging people to eat healthy. You have CGM, you have watches, and you start watching things, how you eat, what you do, how your body is behaving. These are nudging people to eat healthy and organic, which means it leads to demand for better cultivation practices, more healthy foods. Over time, this is going to evolve into a practice. So this is how the market can play. Regardless of powers, incentives, or market failures which need to be handled, the market can be used effectively to create individual behaviors leading to collective action solutions. Number three is the coercive power of the government. This pathway is the most default. Among other things, our social contract with the government states that when we impose social costs and cost negative externalities, the government will step in to solve the problem. I'll expound upon this during the market failure thing that I might talk about, but understand this. And by the way, not everything is a market failure. There's a specific way to look at it. The social contract tells us only when we cause these kind of social problems, negative externalities, social costs that we impose to everybody else, we cause problem to other people as well, we expect the government to step in and solve the problem. If we take the traffic example in India, so far governments have been solving for congestion on the supply side by provisioning more road space for motor vehicles. This is limited and at some point it will soon stop. Because as I mentioned in episode 4 and the Javan's paradox, the opportunity cost of increasing supply will become very prohibitive soon. Every lane that you add comes out of something else you're going to be destroying. And the value of that something else is soon going to outweigh the cost of your lane and the cost of your commute. You're probably destroying a business to add lanes to go to a workplace, and after that you may want this business which doesn't exist and you may have to look for something else. It has happened in most other places. So but for a public good like air, they probably should be imposing financial and non-financial penalties. Most governments in India haven't rustled up the courage to introduce penalties for causing air pollution, right? None of you are going to accept that. Delhi has toyed with bans and rationing. However, cities across the world have created restrictive low emission zones, rationing of vehicles by congestion charging, etc. I'll do a separate episode on the concept of social cost and how it may help preserve the fast depleting public goods. Government solving the problem seems to be the default option for now, and they don't seem to be able to muster the courage to piss you off all day by imposing penalties and constraints. So they will soft pedal. They'll be populist in nature. And you also don't want so much of coercion. If we expect them to solve this without any inconvenience to us, it is not possible. So these are the three approaches: the collectivization, using the markets productively, and resorting to the coercive power. These are the three typical pathways in which social cost and externalities and collective action problems can be solved. If you don't want a tragedy in the commons, let's not have a comedy as well. But the commons need to be preserved and we need to work towards this. Which of these three approaches do you think will work in Indian cities? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next episode. Building on this theme, continually building on this theme, introducing you to more concepts, and we'll soon begin to answer a lot of questions and delve into the ways in which we can look at solving them. There's no one solution, there are lots. But tell me more.